Hello, I'm Robert Royal, and these are the podcasts of The Catholic Thing. The Catholic Thing is a daily column series online at www.thecatholicthing.org. You can subscribe for free to The Catholic Thing simply by going to our website and entering your email. And every day at 6 a.m. in the morning, 365 days a year, you will receive a brief 1,000 words, no more, column about some subject of Catholic interest in your inbox. So please do that. You can do it for free, and I think you'll be very happy that you did. Today, we're recording a podcast at the beginning of the October Synod on Synodality in 2024. This, at least in theory, is the last large meeting of the Synod on Synodality. It initially should have been one synod last October, but the Holy Father decided to break it into two parts. And so we've got the concluding 2024 section starting this week over in Rome. And I thought that the best person to get us started in thinking about what is going to happen at this synod is my longtime friend and previous colleague at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, George Weigel. George, I think, probably needs little introduction to hardly any of you. But for those of you who don't know his work, his magisterial biography of John Paul II, which came out 25 years ago now, we were happy to record, is really a landmark in a study of that great papacy. He's also written about Benedict XVI. He's written books about what's been happening in the church in the last few years. So George is really an authoritative American commentator on what's going on in the church and the world. And George, we're really grateful that you have some time to be with us today. We're both going over to Rome, by the way. He's going tonight, I'm going tomorrow night, and we'll continue these conversations and do some writing from there as well. But George, thank you. It's good to see you.
Thanks for having me, Bob. I'm a great fan of the Catholic Thing. It makes a 365-day-a-year great contribution to the Catholic conversation. So let me, too, encourage our listeners to sign up.
Yeah, thank you. Look, I'd like to start with what I admit is an impossibly large question. But you've been following the church in Rome quite closely now for at least 30 years and probably longer. And I'd just like to get your sense, since we're embarking on this unknown territory that we call the Synod on Synodality, about where this fits in the recent history in the past few decades of the church. What is your sense of what this is doing and what it portends for the church in the near future?
Bob, I think this is a kind of pause period in the modern trajectory of Catholic history. If you look at the living parts of the world church throughout our country and indeed throughout the world, they really couldn't care less about the Synod on Synodality because they're living what this is supposed to be about, a church in communion, participation, and mission. What this has devolved into is a gathering, perhaps the last hurrah, of all the people who really did not accept the trajectory of Catholic life as defined by John Paul II and Benedict XVI in their authoritative interpretation of the Second Vatican Council. So this is their last shot. And as I say, I think what we're living in a kind of pause moment. But the trajectory of the Catholic future is clear. Where the church is living, it's living the new evangelization of John Paul II.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right to point to the fact that, at least here in the United States, there already is a lot of that kind of dynamic interplay among various elements in the church. And if we continue to be able to carry this out in this country, maybe it'll have some effect in the larger world as well. Let me talk with you a bit specifically about what you think is going to go on inside that room, because as we know, the Holy Father has taken off those hot button issues like LGBT, women deacons, et cetera. And he's given them to a series of what he calls study groups, which are going to be meeting and are meeting, I suppose, right now and are going to report to the Synod. And they will not finish at the very earliest their studies until next June 2025. So can we speculate about what's going to be discussed, since those issues are off the table, inside that room, which, by the way, is going to be a closed room? There are going to be very few things that are made public that are going to happen inside that room. And the Holy See has even recently announced that it's asked people to keep the deliberations, their conversations with other people, secret, not just during the synod, but even after it takes place. So, what can we imagine is actually going to happen inside that room?
Well, Bob, as you've heard, I'm sure, many times, that the meaning of the pontifical secret is that you can tell one reliable person at a time. So I think there'll be a lot of leaking going on here. I think the big subterranean, maybe even on the surface issue this time, is going to be the question of whether national bishops' conferences have doctrinal teaching authority. That's where those in favor of women deacons, the LGBTQ agenda, and all the rest of it are now putting their chips. They know they are not going to get consensus in the world church or even from this pope on the full progressive Catholic agenda. So let's try to do it through national bishops' conferences. Now, this is a prescription for the Anglicanization of Catholicism. And there is going to be serious pushback on that in October 2024, should that emerge as the defining issue of the Synod.
Yeah, it's quite interesting that I've noticed that some of the progressive publications here in the United States have even speculated that maybe the members, and there are almost 400 delegates to this session of the Synod, about one quarter of them, I think, that are not actually bishops, which is an oddity in the Synod of Bishops. But there's been some recommendations by certain persons who shall remain nameless in this podcast that the delegates just go off script and they just decide to take on some of these issues. I don't think that that's very likely, but do you see kind of a fifth column emerging here that might try to put some things on the agenda?
Well, there's a fifth column that'll be operating off Broadway, as we say, and that's for sure. But the pushback I would like to see inside the Synod is against the Synod procedures. At the end of last year, when the Synod General Council, a group of bishops elected by their brother bishops to advise the Synod General Secretariat, met to look at what had happened last October, there was very considerable agreement that this conversations in the spirit methodology was manipulative, silly, didn't let people speak their minds, did not let disagreements be engaged. And there was a very strong proposal to replace that. It's back again. So let's see if there's some pushback right at the very beginning on why are we doing what we said we really didn't want to do. What kind of autocracy is this? I mean, someone said recently, this is a tiny oligarchy pretending it's a democracy, and there might be some serious pushback on that. I have no doubt that certain unnamed parties will be pushing certain agendas inside the Synod Hall, but I'm really interested to see if people who are tired of being manipulated and treated as children assert themselves as Catholic adults.
Interesting. Listen, I mentioned these study groups that are going to deal with these hot button issues. We can't know. I mean, we can tell from the makeup of some of the people who've been invited to serve on those committees that they are tilted in a certain, let's say, moderately progressive direction. Although who knows? I'm going to ask you to speculate right now. Where do you think those things are going to go? Are they going to actually finish up in June as they're supposed to, or is this just a kind of you can also read this as a kind of a delaying tactic. At least here in Washington, we always say that one way to prevent things from getting to the point where a decision has to be made is to start a committee, and that committees talk forever. They make recommendations, and maybe they're acted on. They're not. So just in a nutshell, what do you think about where these committees will end up, these studies groups?
I think they'll end up looking like simulacra of the National Catholic Reporter editorial page. But that's simply not going to sell in the world church. Whether this is an attempt to give that world yet another chance to express its views, I don't know. Push these things down the road, I don't know. One thing I do know, to go back to your previous question, is that there is going to be real pushback from the African bishops at this synod on fiducia supplicans. They don't like this. They don't like being told that they're behind the cultural eight ball on these issues, and they're coming, I think, prepared to assert themselves this time as they have not done before. So that'll be very interesting to watch.
Just for the sake of our listeners and viewers who don't know, Fiducia Supplicans is the Vatican document that allows the this is a controversy, of course. It's a blessing of individuals in a same-sex relationship, or a blessing of the couples, and this has, of course, created a great uh, storm of controversy everywhere in the world, but primarily in Africa, where the Vatican has actually been forced to kind of concede a certain independence to the African bishops on the issue. Well, George, look, I look forward to seeing you in Rome. We'll probably try to bring you back on the podcast at some point when we've got some other materials. So let me just, in closing, since we've kind of hit the end of our time together, let me just encourage everyone listening or watching that we will be doing almost daily coverage at the Catholic Thing under a special department that we have for things that happen in the Vatican that we call the Vatican Thing. And George does some extensive analysis and commentary at First Thing. So you have two sources that you can resort to. And we also hope that we'll be back with you soon again in the TCT podcast. Thanks, and see you soon.